So thank you everybody for coming. This is something that's been near and dear to my heart for quite a long time. I'm going to go through a quick introduction of myself. Hopefully everyone's at least got some rough familiar with MVPs, but I'll be going through that as well. But to start with, we'll talk about me. I've been in IT for basically my entire career. I actually started doing IT work and creating different random things while I was still in high school. My tenure spread across a lot of different areas within a Fortune, what grew to finally when I left to a Fortune 120, I believe, and really was focused across making things successful. I built a lot of products in a lot of tools that were still in use to this day that were running live for 20 years and still were seen as best in class. You can see a couple of the details on there about me. This being start out, I'm a trans woman, came out a few years ago, recently, just after I got the Technology Leader of the Year award. I'm a mom to 2 kids, and I'm a glutton for punishment. So I am also the treasurer at a nonprofit. And for those of you that have done treasurer work, you know just how painful that can be. So a lot of us are familiar with MVPs, but I'm going to go through it real quick just to make sure we have our bases covered. We talk about a minimum viable product a lot. People have heard the term a lot of times, but not necessarily does everyone agree what that is made up of and what it gets to be and how you define minimum and what the incremental path of minimum viable products are. We've all seen that weird picture, if we've done agile training, of a skateboard to a bicycle to a scooter to a car to a rocket ship, and that path just never made sense to me. You don't start out building a bicycle if you want to build a rocket ship, unless we're talking about learning engineering. I put up in the corner the nice little cake example, because making a cake and making cupcakes, you do a lot of the same processes. You do a lot of the same things, and you learn how to make a good cake that you can use to make cupcakes or cupcake popsicles, or those little things like that, or various little things. And so you can get a good feel of, are you going to have success with your product, with the important parts, the cake and the frosting, separately from going out and building a really important event thing like a wedding cake. And so I see that initial making cupcakes as a minimum viable product to know that you can make tasty cakes and tasty frostings, and you can sell that product, and you can get people interested in it, and you can get them making orders and bringing in revenue before you start moving on to big ticket items like wedding cakes. And of course, this is an established industry. This example, you can learn how to make a wedding cake. These problems are already solved. But what if you're trying to do something that's not been done before? This is start out, after all. We're trying to do a lot of things that people have either not done or have not done well enough. And so how do you, in those scenarios, solve those problems before you get to the point of running out of runway, which is a worst case scenario, or before you get to the point of getting to the 3rd or 4th or 5th seed funding, only to find out you can't solve them, that your dream is over, and you've wasted a ton of your personal capital, credibility, as well as actual capital getting there. So really, we get into, why do we do an MVP? We want to fail fast. We want to fail cheap. We want to know that it's not going to succeed well before the point that we're trying to sell this to millions of people. One of the favorite examples I have, look at Google Glass. It had this huge fanfare. I wasn't at the Google I/O event where they came out with that. I had just had a child, and so I wasn't able to. Had this huge fanfare where they're talking about the future of wearable technology and Google Glass, and the people skydiving with a live stream of skydiving all the way down. While they had a great demo, and it was a really cool idea, it had a bunch of fundamental technology problems and fundamental social problems that they did not tackle from the get out. And these types of things, these type of moonshot concepts, is where we start getting into minimum viable products, and we start getting into failure modes. What can go wrong so that we know why it happens or what to anticipate before we get there. Something I quote very often as I talk about challenges is the Dunning-Kruger effect. For those that don't know, it was a study done a number of years ago by two professors, Dunning and Kruger, where they talked about how do you know that you don't know something? And conversely, the propensity for people that don't know something to think they know everything. There's the constant, or not constant, but the classic thing in physics where scientists at the time and physicists at the time thought they understood everything about the physical world there was to know. And then this magic discovery of radiation happened and everything got completely thrown for a loop. Classic example of that Dunning-Kruger effect problem of not knowing that there's so much more to learn. Really, a lot of things I love about using an MVP cycle where you have incremental minimum viable products is you get that chance to really engage with your customers, to find out those things that you did not know, to find out those things that you could not have anticipated with the team you have. And we all have to work with a finite amount of money, finite team. We have to get the experts we can get on board, and we have to get the customers we can get on board. But there's always going to be more things we don't know. And so we have to, figure out some way to answer as many of those questions as possible, as early as possible, so we have the best chance for success and we have a better idea of knowing what's coming. So we've all been in parts of projects, and I'm going to keep saying so because apparently it's one of those verbal affectations I have, and I'm very out of practice with presenting, which is one of my failure modes. I was thinking about this ahead of time. We've all had those projects that go wrong, scope creep, people that, which has the common thing of unclear objectives and unrealistic expectations. All these things add together to create a project where you learned things along the way, and that's cool, but you didn't get to success, or you had to spend a lot more money on it than you intended, or you planned to, or you had available. You end up selling more of your organization than you wanted to as a founder because you had unanticipated problems that, had you spent a little bit more time up front thinking about what could go wrong, pulling in more incremental MVPs, you could have anticipated, or at least known what the problems were going to be ahead of time and known what your funding requirements were going to be. So a lot of the tools I'm going to talk about today are specifically the FMEA tool, will help with some of these. Obviously, it's not a magic bullet. Nothing can fix every problem. This is just one of the ways that I really enjoy finding out the problems of what my project's going to have well in advance of actually executing on it. So again, there's lots of great tools for risk analysis. I had a lot of great people I talked to as I was getting prepared to do this session. It's the first time doing a session like this outside of my former employer. So I'm putting together a new slide deck, a new way of presenting it for a different audience. So I would love some feedback. That's part of the known unknowns I had at the end of this. But I figured I'd go through some tools that I've seen used in my time. Obviously, I'm talking about the failure mode effects analysis here, the FMEA. While a former partner of mine was going through nursing school, I learned about nursing care plans. I'm actually going to go through one real quick here in a minute. Since most of us have had some type of interaction with the healthcare industry, we've seen the results of care plans. We've seen what happens when nurses go through it, and they actually say, these are the things we're going to do to help make sure you get what you need and get better. But there's tons of others. Every industry has their version of ways to manage risk, mitigate risk, or log risk, or other things like that. This is particularly one that I enjoy because it crosses every industry, every vertical, and really works well for when you're doing product creations. So this is particularly your nursing care plan. It's the large, big format. Why they called a 5-column format? No idea, because there's obviously 6 columns, but it's not my system. Somebody else made it. I just find it amusing. In this particular one example, we're starting out with the nurse does their assessment of the patient, says, this is what we're seeing, and then goes into why, what do we think is going on? And again, this is just the nursing level. This isn't the doctor. what we think will happen with the patient from there, and what outcomes we'd like to see, and then what steps we're going to take. None of these are quantified risk levels. None of these are cross-patient types of things. These are all very individualized for the individual patient. But they're really a way of saying, here's what we see, here's what we think, here's what we are worried about, and here's what we're going to do about it, which is what I like out of the FMEA process. So if there's any questions so far, but I'm going to doubt there are. If there are any questions at any point in time, please feel free to put them in the chat as a little bit of a housekeeping item. We're going to do a breakout session towards the end, and I hope everyone can have some time for that. But if there's, again, any questions, please put them in the chat, and we'll go through them as we can. So basically the FMEA, which we'll actually go into a demo of me doing one with everyone here in a moment, is broken up into a few categories. What could go wrong? What of the things we are going to see can go wrong? This could be things like, as I was joking with my daughter on the way back from school today, that if I was building a parade float, the things I would be thinking about going wrong are things like it raining, and it therefore ruining all the work we had done on building a parade float. And if that happens, all the work we've done is gone. We have to start over, or very close to it. So the severity of what happens if it rains is really bad. How likely is it to happen? Well, in Florida, in the dry season, it's not very likely. I live in Florida, so I'm going to use Florida as an example. In the dry season, it's not very likely at all. In the rainy season, which is most of the year, it's going to happen. It's guaranteed. It will happen every day. It's just a question of when. And each of those is going to get a different ranking. So in the dry season, I can take a little bit more risk. And I may say, it's not the biggest of the risks I have because we're working on this in the dry season. But if my time goes over and I don't have enough time, I might have to reevaluate and bump that occurrence up. Detection, but this is one of my favorite ones. How likely are we going to see it before our customer does? If we have a bad product we made, or a bug, or any types of issue, and our customer finds it before we do, that does a lot of damage to your brand. It does a lot of damage to your product as far as what people think about it. You want to know things are going to go wrong before they go wrong. You want to have a chance to fix it before it gets out to a customer, if it's, say, a manufacturing defect. And you want to be able to do the best you can to run damage control in those scenarios. And if you do really well, you fix the issue before it goes out the door. And so your customer never knows there was an issue. That's best case scenario. All of those three categories together, multiplied simply out, you get a risk priority number. It's a number between 1 and 1,000. 1 being it's just not something to worry about. 1,000 being it is the worst thing ever. In a lot of cases, 1,000 or a severity of 10, which is what we're going to use for our ranking numbers, 1 through 10, is someone died as a result of your product. Obviously, that really sucks. It can also be, depending on how you want to rank things, you go out of business because it's such a bad problem. There's a lot of different flexibility in how you do these rankings. Every group has different problems. Some groups legitimately are working on safety critical devices, and a severity 10 where someone dies is a very possible thing. Other groups, a severity 10 may be we cancel the project. We go out of business because we ran out of money, or we realized nothing will happen. So those are the high level definitions. These will make more sense as we go through it. Couple more guiding basics before I get into a demo. The way I utilize FMEAs is not a one-time thing. It's something I do at the beginning of a new product, a new effort. And it's something we use as a guiding principle to say, is this an important problem to solve? It's something we use to guide our agile sprints. It's something we use to guide relative risk, which is one of my favorite parts of the FMEA. I can say, while I'm working with people, everyone has their little pet problem they really love and they want to see solved. But you need to focus your effort on the important things, the things that are going to get you to success, or they're going to prevent you from getting to success. Ideally, you'd be spending your time on the things that will prevent you from getting to success. And so how do you determine what those are? Everyone has their pet problem. You'll have two people. One thinks it's the absolutely most critical thing that we solve the dashboarding problem, and another person will say it's the absolutely most critical that we solve this esoteric bug that only happens every so often. And that we've all seen people spend a half an hour arguing over which one's more important in sprint planning. And a lot of times, even if you're doing an agile where you have a customer tightly looped into it, the customer won't know which one's more important. And I've seen places where they get convinced the esoteric bug that rarely ever happens is the most critical thing ever, even though it means they pushed other important priorities down the list. As you go along, you can go through and re-rank things. You can lower those risks because you put in controls, you've made changes, you've implemented improvements that lower that risk. And again, you can keep guiding and say, what is my most important problems right now? What's my biggest risks, the things that are going to prevent me from getting to the end? So a couple more items before I go into the demo here. I've found the best success with this type of tool when I involve everyone, marketing, senior management, finance, manufacturing, all the engineering teams, user training, customer support, all the different groups possible. Every head of every group involved in new product development to say, what are our big risks? It very well may be that it doesn't matter if the thing is built correctly at all, because it fills such an important thing, or it will solve such an important problem that even if you do it poorly, it's still better than what's out there in the industry. And so technical execution doesn't matter at the first stage for a first MVP. What matters is, can you get out there and find people that have the problem that are willing to work with you? And again, every problem's different. In other cases, engineering is the only important thing because you're entering an area where if it doesn't work perfectly, it's worthless. But you have to relatively rank these things to know, as a founder, as a person really starting out a new product, where to make those investments. And everyone is always gunning to be the most important thing. Engineering will always say engineering is the most important thing. Marketing will always say marketing is the most important thing. Support will always say support's the most important thing. How do you manage which ones actually need the funding at this time? And this is one of the ways I do it. So I forgot I had a slide. Again, I'm out of practice on presenting, so apologize. Part of the point of the way I run these sessions, reason why I include so many different groups and why I try to get as much ideas as possible, is the wisdom of the crowds. It's a concept in sociology and in science, in statistics, that the more people you ask, the closer you're going to get to the real values, the real data, the real information. If I ask one expert, I only ask the engineering expert, what do we need to solve? He's going to give you the engineering point of view. If I have a session with the engineering expert and the marketing expert in the same meeting, discussing through the risks, they can start really hashing this stuff out. They can really start saying, well, okay, if I can't solve this problem engineering, what's it do to marketing? And the marketing will say, well, it does this to marketing. But we can work around that. And that'll create this risk. But I think we can manage that with the way we work today. So bringing together all of people across disciplines really gets you a good picture of what your total connected risk is. From there, we should expect to see a couple things. And the things I've seen in my experience, the things with my own teams over about the last 7 years, I've been using this tool as a heavy piece of my management practice, is that people actually know what is going to impact success. Engineering the person responsible for engineering starts to ask the person responsible for customer support how their piece is going on, and if there's changes they need to make to the system in order to deal with it, because they understand the risk and how important it is to everyone. People have an easier time breaking out of their silo when you have this whole list of everything that can go wrong and how bad it's going to be if it does. And people start coming up with suggestions to say, oh, well, you're having this. Well, why don't I make this change here? Because then it'll simplify your problem there. Okay, cool. Let's try that. Let's see how it goes. And then next time around for the FMEA, you can lower the risk. I'm loving the question I'm seeing on the team of one. We'll definitely get to that towards the end, because we all have places where we're teams of one. I have that in just about every part of my life. But there's definitely ways you can do this. Having more input definitely helps, but is not necessarily required. So as we go further along with your teams, when you do have more than one person, anybody you are involving either as an expert, as a mentor, as a guide, you can bring out your details, your FMEA risks log, and say, this is what I'm worried about. That's going to do two wonderful things. One, it's going to give you a nice way to communicate what your risks are to people that may be thinking about investing or thinking about hopping on board. Gives a nice list of people for you figuring out, where do you need to bring in expertise as you do happen to get funding, or you want to bring in a partner. How do you make sure you're bringing the partner that's going to solve the problems you actually have? And as you think about growing your team. Where do I need to fill in staff? Where do I need to fill in expertise to help mitigate my risks based upon my knowns? So I'm going to go through and jump into a demo here. This is going to be a little bit off the cuff. I did not plan out a lot of how we are going to run this session, but I'm going to pick actually, I'm going to do this because I love to do demos a little bit more freewheeling. Throw in ideas of common things we all run into that we deal with every day. And we're going to go through, and I'm just going to blow out some risks for that kind of thing. So let me bring up my document here while you guys are putting in some things that you do every day that you inherently don't think are risky. And if nobody puts up anything, then I'm going to use doing dishes. So please come up with something better than doing dishes. Can you tell them a mom? Walk the dog. That's a good one. Any other ones before we go from there? Okay, actually, I see a good one. I like take a shower. Take a shower sounds awesome to me right now. And one of these items is going to be real life experience from the last couple of days of myself. So I'm going to start with, we're going to do our product here, and I want to confirm people can see my screen. If you can't, please mention in chat whether the screen share is working or not. So we're going to do iteration one of the taking shower failure mode analysis. So we're going to specifically I'm going to break out a couple categories. It's something I like to do when I'm starting out a new failure mode analysis, is things like the facilities. So we've got to have, a place to take a shower is one problem. If you don't have a place to take a shower, it's kind of hard to shower. There's ways around it. You can still clean yourself up without a, working shower, but you got to go about doing it a little bit different. We've got the safety. Okay, we got very much people have been hurt in the shower. Any other categories of things, or should we come up with those as we go along? I think we'll do them as we go along, just because when you're not doing this in person, it's a little bit harder to do. Supplies, I like that. Oh, and I love how everyone's chiming in already. This is awesome. This is what I like to see in an FMEA session. So facilities, we've got to have a running water of some kind, right? Privacy. We've got to be able to, ideally, we've got to be able to actually do it in a place where we feel safe and be in private. We've got to have supplies. If we're going to be washing our hair, we've got to have the right soap and things. Oops, that actually goes in a category. You can see how much I have not done this lately. See, so everyone can see that something as simple as taking a shower, if you're looking in the chat like I am, just how many items people can come up with. Towels and soap. Got to have, things, we got to have towel, we got to shampoo. Okay, let's go through, and we're just going to leave the last one, safety, for the end. Okay, running water. I've got to have running water of some kind. If I don't have running water, it's kind of hard to take a shower, right? Existing controls is I live in a country where I have, running water provided by the city. So more often than not, I've got water. Now, hot water runs out is an interesting one, especially for me right now. If the hot water runs out or we don't have any hot water, it gets a little frustrating to take a shower, right? Existing controls is we have a tankless. Well, we're going to use my house where I have a tankless water heater. So that's my current controls. If you'd had a tanked water heater where you didn't have an endless supply of hot water, you would have a different relative risk problem for this particular one. Let's specifically break this out for tankless versus tanked. Okay. And sometimes a lot of houses have you can't take a shower longer than 5 minutes because otherwise not everyone can do it. But that might be a control you need to put in. Let's assume there's no controls. Nobody has any agreement on how long showers should be. If you run out of hot water in a tankless house, how bad is it going to be? Are you going to be in a terrible mood like I am when I don't have a hot shower? It's one of my guilty pleasures. Then the severity is going to be higher. If it's not a big deal, hot showers aren't an important thing to you, then the severity may be lower. It is one of my guilty pleasures. So I'm going to say it's a 7, regardless of whether I have a tankless or a tanked water heater. If it runs out, we're just going to assume hot water runs out, I'm upset because it's not the worst thing in the world, but I'm not happy. And when mom's not happy, nobody's happy. So how often does this kind of thing happen? Doesn't happen very often. Most of the time, it's not a big deal. Our hot water heaters run pretty normally. But it does happen now and again. Let's say the occurrence of for a tankless water heater running out of hot water is maybe, let's say it's a 1. It's a tankless water heater. It either has to be broken or we have to have a problem with the natural gas or something along that kind of line, or electricity. So the actual how often it happens isn't very often. A tanked water heater running out of hot water, it happens a lot of times, especially if you don't have any agreements with everyone else on how long showers should be. So let's say it's a 3 or 4. Always, when in doubt, go higher. You'd rather overestimate a risk than underestimate a risk. And how likely are we to detect it before our customer does? And this because our customer is me. Very likely we're not going to detect it. If there's no hot water, based upon the way most people shower, they find out when they go to take a shower. So there's almost no chance. I mean, unless you have like a nice dial in your house that tells you how much hot water you have or things like that. Now, the reason why this is such an important one to me right now, the reason why I picked it is I had a lightning strike the other day that caused my hot water tank to not work. So I don't have hot water right now. So it's been a bad week. Still working on fixing it. And I noticed one question from Wes about the detection feels kind of inverted, and it does. The point of this whole thing is that when you multiply things out, no one category is worse than another. The RPN being up to 1,000 means the worst case scenario. So you'll notice that in using these two examples where we have tankless versus tanked, which is a perfect comparison, the relative risk of a tankless water heater not having hot water is relatively low compared to a tanked, which does correspond with what we see, both the marketing and what people's general expectations of tankless and tanked water heaters are, is that you should not run out of hot water in a tanked or a tankless water heater. But there are failure modes where you can. And those are the kind of things you can talk about and really drive into on the engineering level. What could cause a tankless water heater to run out of water? We could have insufficient capacity. A tankless water heater can only deliver a certain number of gallons per minute at a certain degree temperature rise. And so if you undersize your system, you end up running into not having enough hot water. Now, in your particular house, if you've got a lot of teenagers, and they're always trying to shower at the same time because they're all going to school, you could very easily run into no hot water. And I love that everyone's jumping into some of the safety things, because those are fun. We'll get to them in a minute. But you can see undersized system. I see another one for colder than normal water input, especially in Florida. My hot water comes out of the ground, or my cold water comes out of the ground at relatively okay temperature. And so I don't need as big of a system. Whereas if I lived up north in Michigan, where I used to live, where the water comes in at like 50 degrees, I've got to raise it, 70 degrees in Michigan compared to the 30 I have to raise it here in Florida. So, on a particularly cold day, I don't have as much capacity for running showers here. So in case you haven't seen already, you can see that I've skipped some columns. And when I'm doing a new session, sometimes I'll jump around, because the point and the value in this type of tool is to capture, again, this wisdom of the crowd. Had I sat down to think about this, I would not have thought about tanked water heaters, because I don't have one. I wouldn't have thought about privacy, because it's not been a problem in my house. I have 2 showers. So it's not something I've had to worry about. And you can easily see how the ranking numbers create a quick, easy way to say, okay, well, this is a much bigger risk than this one is. Let's jump over to safety for a moment. And we're going to talk about what that one is. We got risk from scalding. Water's too hot. We'll say it's incorrect settings, right? So let's say the system's it's got it set for 150 degrees input water temp, output water temperature, and we're expecting people to adjust the dial correctly. Something that people sometimes do on a tanked water heater to get themselves more hot water. So we're resulting in a scalding. Somebody could be actually burned quite severely, and if it's a small child, could be incredibly burned to the point where they need to get medical treatment. Existing controls, a lot of systems have set temperatures, and in some cases, some places they have a mixing valve to automatically adjust the temperature. I believe that's code in most places now, where you need to have an automatic mixing valve put in. That was a failure mode that one could have been predicted. But like many regulations, it's written on the failures of people that were harmed. So let's say the water's temperature, someone gets scalded. How bad of a problem is that? They're not dead unless they're a small child. Do you have small children in a home? If you do, that can be deadly. That could be a serious issue. So let's say it's a 9. Okay, occurrence. How often is it going to happen? If it's set wrong, if your system is set incorrectly, let's just say it's pure on, it's going to happen it could happen every single time. If you're not being careful, if you have no controls, you're never going in to check to make sure your kid hasn't turned the hot water temperature up while they're getting in. You're not on top of it. It could happen every single time. And only through luck have you gotten out of it. So let's say it's a 5. And again, I'm speeding through this because we're doing a demo session. In a real session, we discuss this more. We'd break it out further. We'd talk through the scenarios a lot more. How likely are we to figure this out? This is a problem before our customer does. In this particular scenario, let's assume our child is the customer. We're not. There's almost no chance we're going to notice it before our child does if they happen to be playing with the dials and turn the hot water up. So we're going to have a pretty high risk item. So now if I'm worrying about which thing I need to fix most as a parent, which many of us probably are, or at least know some, I've now realized insufficient capacity is not a problem I need to worry about as the first problem. And that is one of the things I really like about the FMEA. It helps you understand where you need to focus that time. This is now a safety issue. If I'm going to be solving any problem, I could solve both at the same time. I could install a tankless system and a mixing valve that prevents scalding from being possible by automatically putting the water out at a safe temperature. I can install a hydrostatic valve in my bathroom that automatically does that as well and has a maximum set temperature. Lots of great solutions, but I have not implemented them yet. So my risk level does not change. And now the next extension is some, we've already thought of some ideas of things we could do here. We can install a mixing valve, a whole house mixing valve. So I'm going to add myself a column because I didn't want to go too far into this demo without talking about adding columns. You're going to see if you're trying to use this in your sessions, people want to say, oh, well, we've put in a potential solution, so let's lower the risk. That's counterproductive. The purpose of this is to know where you are at today with things you've executed on today and potential paths to go forward to lower your risks. We could also do our hydrostatic valve. We could add a checklist item to check the water temperature. And say weekly. There's lots of different ways you can solve these problems. There's lots of different ways those can themselves go wrong. Let's say we implement a checklist. Let's say we actually are going to implement the checklist. And a part of our thing is now we're coming back to update our checklist or update our FMEA because we've implemented a checklist. So what's the failure mode of not doing the checklist? So Wes had another great question. It is one of the challenges. People can start to guide things, but when you're laying things out on the table, they've also got to defend some of their risk scores to say, this is most important because this is what can go wrong. And this is where you really start to have to drive out, see, okay, what's the results in? How could this go wrong? How are we currently trying to mitigate it? And you'll get people that like an idea versus people that don't like an idea starting to say, well, we need to implement this abstraction layer so that if we implement a different system in the future, then this. And you'll get somebody else on the other side going, yeah, but if we implemented this other system, the extraction layer or the system we built on the ideas of the old system. And so the abstraction layer would be worthless anyway. So we ended up wasting time. Again, nothing's a silver bullet. The point is really here to help put more things out on the table and say, this is why we're doing the things we're doing. This is why we're focusing on the things we're focusing on, and to put things out there in that way. So I'm going to stop here for now. Again, this was meant to be a high level introduction. And I'm going to jump into the next set of slides. So some quick good examples, bad examples. We did probably do some bad examples in that last FMEA, hence the reason why I'm putting this slide in here. It was, again, one of the failure modes I thought of as I went through this session, planning out this session. People have a tendency to want to be very high level. We're at a demo. It's going to be high level. it was something I knew was going to happen, but I also knew there was some controls I could put in place, like patterns and anti-patterns. In a self-driving car, you need to stop. It's critical that it actually be able to stop the car. If it lacks the engineering capacity to do that, or lacks the proper code to detect that there's a stop place it needs to stop, or a stop sign, it's not going to work. And the car is going to go careening through the stop, potentially hurting someone or something. Now, bad example is obviously the very simplified version of it. It needs to stop. These types of things end up causing, of course, some of the animosity between marketing type of people and engineering type people, in that it's not going far enough, which is why I say it depends on the audience. You may have a very high level lead FMEA discussion where you're talking at a very high level, the car needs to stop. And then that blows out and becomes its own category. And you blow it out into 10, 100, 200 items about why that could go wrong, and things you could potentially do about it. But you want to be detailed. You want to get in there. You want to talk about real things that you can evaluate and say, this is why it's an issue. This is why it's a risk. And here's what could happen. So you can say, well, if that did happen, it's not a big deal, or it is a big deal, or we're already taking care of it somewhere else, or we can logically deduce that that will not happen because of this, 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 and this that we're already doing today. And that's really where that types of thing goes on. I did want to do some breakout sessions. One of the things I think will help with anybody trying to actually go in and do some of these things on their own is having at least tried to do it once. The first time's always the hardest. So let's do that first time here in a nice, safe place that where no one has to worry about whether they're screwing it up for something important or not, losing political capital within their organizations. Again, that's a risk we have to manage. So let's try it right here. We're going to break out into a couple rooms. Each one of you pick a leader. There's a link to a Google Doc, which I'll copy into the chat, that you can copy, or that you can make a copy of yourself and use to create your own Google Doc for it. I'll be jumping around between sessions. And if there's any questions, please feel free to jump back in here. I think we've got everybody now. So one item I want to go through, one of the things that I used as inspiration for this whole effort, many of you might remember a few years back, there was a Google effort called Project Loon, where they were going to use floating balloons in space, or now in the atmosphere, to beam internet, high-speed internet, to different areas of the country where they could not actually have internet. This was prior, of course, to SpaceX's effort of Starlink. They started out saying, well, what's stopping us from doing it? Why can't we do it? And they said, well, what are the problems we need to solve? And they came up with lists like the FMEA, very similar to it, where they said, okay, well, what's going to prevent us from getting this to work? Well, can we get a balloon in the atmosphere where it'll stay at an appropriate place? Okay, didn't have anything to do with the internet. It was just, can we manage a balloon to automatically stay at the right height for optimal transmission? And they said, okay, yeah, we proved we can do that. Then the next thing is, okay, well, can we bounce a signal back and forth to that balloon? Can we launch enough balloons subsequently to make this a sustainable business model? Can we do it inexpensively enough? And all those things had to be solved to get to the end of internet via balloons. Now, obviously today, this is not a thing they're doing anymore. They canceled this project because along the way of trying to solve those problems, they knew they could put a balloon up there. They knew they could bounce a signal back and forth. They knew they could do all these relays. They found is they couldn't do it cost efficiently with current technology and current manpower requirements. But they learned a lot of things. They failed fast. I don't know if they failed cheap, but they failed fast. They probably failed cheap for what the effort was, especially if you compare it to Starlink. But they did go through a nice structured effort to say, this is what we have to solve to get to the end. This is what we have to solve to know if this is a feasible project or not. And they tackled only those problems up to the point of actually marketing the product, which of course they stopped well before. there's obviously a lot more questions. One question I saw in here, this is something as far as, do we recommend this at the beginning of a project or more near the end? This is something I do all throughout. This is something I do, especially if things are starting to get weird or people are not communicating what the relative risks are, or you're having troubles communicating that. I did it probably the first time I really did this in the middle, because I had some customers that did not have a feel that I was managing risks well. And so it was actually something I went through to kind of document all of our risks and help get everyone back on board that, no, we are managing risks. We are managing the challenges, and we're managing them quite well, thank you. But now, as some people that are actually in this meeting will know, it's something I encourage to do at the very inception. Before we even decide, are we going to do something? We started with, let's go look at the failure modes. Let's talk through it, and let's determine whether there's insurmountable challenges that have to be addressed, or whether it's all solved problems. We just have to put it together. If it's something you'd like to discuss more, obviously, as I said, this is a very high level session. I am available to walk people through this a little bit more in depth. If it's something you'd like to have somebody help your team walk through, please reach out to me, either LinkedIn or my email's on there as well. If you did manage to get through and create a quick FMEA within your sessions, I'd absolutely adore if you could share it to me. And obviously, one of the failure modes I was worried about in the breakout sessions was people having to jump in and out and it not working quite as well. Learned a lot from that session. So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Kelly. I hope this has been helpful. Please subscribe to startup newsletters and really keep us in mind when it comes to learning about new stuff. And here's a short plug that I want to make. If you wanted to contribute to startup planning events and webinars and local chapter events, please reach out to Startout, and we always welcome volunteers. All of us are volunteers, including Kaylee, and if you like to put on something similar to what Kelly has done for our community, please reach out. And in the process, you'll gain a lot of network and getting to know a lot of experts. And hopefully this has been helpful. And we will see you in our next startup event. Thank you, guys.